I want to bring in our political experts right now. On the Republican side, Tim Rosales. On the Democratic side, Ed Emerson. Guys, great to have you back at the table for the second debate. Candidate has changed. We have a candidate change, a horse change in the middle of the race. Ed, I started with you last time, so in the spirit of fairness, we're going to start with Tim. Just overall thoughts on tonight's debate.
Well, I think there was a lot of silliness in the debate. Once you got past some of the silliness, I think by both candidates, that you got into some policy and both tried to highlight what it was that really separated them. With Kamala Harris, what separated her from Donald Trump is issues like abortion, right? She was going to talk about that. She was also going to try to kind of talk a little bit about foreign policy and some differences they had there, but really was about, driving that difference in abortion. I think what Donald Trump was trying to do and did so successfully, just like Kamala Harris did on abortion, was he wanted to talk about border security. And he wanted to really try to co-opt the economics and inflation argument. I don't know. I think it was kind of a standoff there. Both of them were trying to, inject their own particular positions on that. But where he really drove the divide and kind of showed that there was a difference between the two is on borders. So I think on abortion, on borders, both of them were able to do what they wanted to do, which was show that there was a stark difference between the two of them on those particular issues. On the others, it was almost a tit for tat on certain things.
Yeah, I mean, everyone expected coming into this debate, those are the issues each party is going to try to own in this election. Ed, it seems like you're in a different place, different mindset this time around after the last debate. So you're up. What do you think?
Well, the last debate was dispiriting.
Yeah.
She kicked his butt. Come on. He wasn't even in this. He had nothing to say. He's a liar. He will continue to lie, and I think voters are going to start moving right now, tonight, overnight. It'd be interesting to see the overnight polling tonight. She did a great job. She looked presidential. She looked like she was in command of the facts. He looked like he was on drugs or something. His face was weird, but I think he always looks weird. I think Kamala tonight was able to demonstrate that she's ready for this. You've got to get in there. You got to throw punches. She threw a few pretty good punches right there. I thought she did a nice job of pivoting off some of the stuff he had to say. I thought that the whole debate, start to finish, including his wandering closing remarks, not only is he morally unfit to be the president of the United States, he's mentally not ready to be the president of the United States. He needs to go.
So do you agree, Tim? Do you think that some undecided voters that were watching this this debate is going to be a factor in their decision making? Because all of the polling leading up until today shows the race virtually tied.
I think that undecided voters probably were not watching this debate if they do not have an opinion about what the presidential race is already. They're not going to be sitting there necessarily watching a presidential debate and kind of what's going on Tuesday night. What they're going to be doing is they're going to be looking at the reaction afterwards. And I think that reaction is somewhat predictable, right? We saw in this debate, I think that, maybe both Ed and I can agree, I don't want to put words in his mouth. The moderators were not so awesome. They tried to fact check Donald Trump. They didn't fact check Kamala Harris on several issues. That was a big problem, I think, that they had. And kind of the follow up from that is you'll probably see on some of the main networks, you'll have, Kamala Harris, came in, as Ed said, did what she needed to do. Donald Trump, he was, here are all the repeated, accusations and charges that Kamala Harris made against Donald Trump. And that's what they're going to digest. If they do get any clips, what are they going to see? Are they going to see anything that is attractive to them? I think that what the candidates had to do and Trump really had to do in order to overcome some of that prejudice that's going to be weighed kind of later, is say, okay, can I show a real contrast on issues like border security and even, like I said, trying to go into taxation, inflation, and some of these other things so that, those undecided voters kind of in the aftermath can kind of get beyond, and wade through some of the kind of rhetoric out there by pundits like all of us and come to their own conclusions. I don't know that this debate did that, though.
I have to say, though, Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, he's a showman. He can, land the material. He can have those one-liners. We've seen it since 2015. You and I were having a conversation before the debate started, and you were like, look, this guy's formidable in ways. I mean, he took out, 13 Republicans?
Right.
And the line where he accused her of copying him, he said, she copies me so much, I was going to send her a MAGA hat. And she even laughed at it.
Yeah. No, he's... Yeah, I'll use the word, and I hate to say it, he's formidable. He is a showman. He is all huff and puff and nothing underneath. He is spiritualist. He is valueless. He is the wrong person for this country. He doesn't believe in anything but himself. The minute the topic got into some sort of detail or everything like that, he wandered off. I think she won this debate. There's no question about that. She was clearly the better prepared of the two people. And I think he's going to have some explaining to do tomorrow, to his base, to his fundraising base. People aren't going anywhere, and Donald Trump, former President Trump, as I promised myself I'd call him, there's nowhere for him to expand.
In the base, right? Yeah.
In the base.
Yeah.
There are, in 7 states, about 140,000 people, 20,000 a state. I'm ballparking here, of people that will decide this election. In Pennsylvania, in North Carolina, in Georgia, Nevada. These folks saw this debate tonight and saw that he's not ready. He may have been ready once, questionable, but she won this debate, and I think we're going to get a nice bounce out of it.
Do you think that she'll see a bounce out of it? Because did she really have a bounce post-convention?
We haven't seen a bounce from her since she kind of was foisted into the role of running for president.
Right.
I'll disagree a little bit with Ed on this and say, I think that the stronger on the policy and specifics was probably Donald Trump tonight, which is not typical necessarily for the former president. I think that Vice President Harris tried to really run away from the last 4 years and pretend like they didn't exist. She is as linked to the policy and the actions of the Biden-Harris administration as anybody there, and she tried to get away from that. In terms of swing voters in states like Pennsylvania, I think it's going to be difficult, and this is where voters are going to have to pay attention, and we'll have to see how Pennsylvania how they cover this, and that is. She was doing her best to talk about, I'm pro-fracking. She was almost, sitting there at an oil well saying, drill, baby, drill. Right. That's how far she's going on the issue. And then at the end of the debate saying, but I'm the champion of climate change and cleaning up the environment. And I don't think that's going to wash. People are going to sit there and say, okay, where are you?
Both can be right, by the way, at the same time. I agree with you. I thought the fracking thing was extraordinary. I think what needs to happen right now is they need to hit the campaign trail. They need to work as hard as they can between now and then. And if you're a Democrat, get off your seat, get on your feet, and let's do something. We can help across the country. You can make a difference in North Carolina. You can make a difference in Pennsylvania. You can make a difference in Wisconsin right now. What voters think, and I think California voters in particular, they think the race is over. The race is not over. Donald Trump's polling very well. His base is right where they were before this debate started tonight. And if we're going to pick people off, if we're going to convince people that he's the wrong candidate, today's the day to start. Tonight, do something. Write a $5 check. Get off your seat, get on your feet, and make a difference.
Well, and two, if we have any sort of shift in the economy, I mean, yes, there's 50-something days until Election Day.
Right.
Voting is going to start here in a couple of weeks in some states on August or October 7th here. Ballots go out in the state of California. Obviously, we know the electorate here in California and the way this state is going to go. Down ballot is the big thing here with the congressional races.
Sure.
But it just seems like no matter what the Biden-Harris White House does or the Harris-Walz campaign says and points to Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act, people feel like the economy is better under Donald Trump. They just it's just baked in for him. It is something he can sell. It's the businessman that he has touted himself to be all these years. Do you think that there's any way that the Harris and Walz campaign can get on message and sort of take that from him? Or do you think my observation is off here?
No, I think you're absolutely right. The key is, though, and it comes down to kitchen table issues. People go to the grocery store and they're like, prices are higher now than they were 5 years ago, right? Okay, well, that's all they care about. The fact that they can't afford as much and their money doesn't go as far as it did 4 or 5 years ago. They're not going to get too deep, I think, into the reasons on that. And I think one mistake that Harris made, and I think Trump made some missteps tonight as well, but one mistake Harris made, and I think it was bolstered, by the moderators, was I felt like that some of middle America are going to look at tonight's debate, for those who are watching, and say, she was talking down to me. Right? She was giving the perception that I know better than you what it is that I want to do, right, for this country, rather than giving some specifics.
Obama was criticized of that too, wasn't he?
He was criticized a little bit for that too, but it worked for Obama. It was a little bit different. I think that criticism, and we'll see how that plays out. Again, not what you, me, Ed, I mean, think about this, but going down to those voters who, they are looking at their grocery bills, they're looking at their energy bills, they're looking at, kind of their work prospects, all of those types of things. They live in many of those swing states. And do they feel that either of these presidential candidates, not just Harris, but Trump as well, are they really talking to them about solving the problems that they are faced with on a daily basis? Tonight, I felt that there were points where Kamala Harris, could have been perceived as talking down to that, and I think that we'll wait and see kind of how that shows up in some of the post polling.
I believe they talked about a lot in the 90 minutes. But I believe that the former president called her out for not going to the border. So she should go there. Do you think she should go before Election Day?
Sure. Why not? I think, to me, do everything you can, as often as you can, as much as you can. We had a bill in Congress that would have closed the border. We had a bill in Congress that would have made a difference and reduced the amount of people that are allowed to come across the border legally. Trump killed it. He wanted a political issue, and he's hanging his hat on a political issue. Listen, he got shellacked tonight. There is no parsing this in any way, shape, or form. This guy got beat like a drum, and they're going to come out tomorrow, and they're going to make all kinds of lies. I mean, how many, do we have a lie total for how many lies Trump told tonight?
Do you think Trump got shellacked tonight?
I don't think he got shown. I think neither of them did any harm. Really,
that's what we were talking about in our 4 p.m. show when I joined Riley Carroll, and she was like, what do they both have to do? And I said, just do no harm.
Right.
I mean, it's like you said, it's going to come down to a handful. And when you're talking about national elections, like 20,000 votes is a handful of votes.
Right.
In these certain states, and like the base is in, and is this going to be as consequential? I mean,
Well,
the debate?
The debate, like what was said tonight, and for those suburban women in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, here's my thing.
Okay, go ahead.
It's what we needed to hear.
Right, yeah.
As Democrats, it's what we needed to hear is that she's articulate, she's ready. I mean, in our minds, right?
She's not even though she's vice president, she's not well known.
She had a lot more ground to cover than he did.
Everybody knew.
Didn't mean to cut you off.
No. I completely agree with that. I think that they were both also, they have their own styles, and you have to get used to their styles, right? But they were both, I think, actually pretty well prepared. And like I said, they went to directly where the talking points that they really thought that they wanted to hit on. So if I'm their campaign teams, I'm probably happy with the performance of my candidate. Kamala Harris certainly, I think, hit some of the points that she wanted to hit, talking about abortion, really challenging on economic issues, expressing and demonstrating some competency or trying to on foreign policy. Donald Trump clearly went after the border. He talked about some specific policy points that he wanted to do. I thought he stayed fairly calm and kind of even keeled through the whole thing. When, watching this on TV,
unusual.
She was expressive on camera to some of the things. And he, until the end, he got a little more expressive, but for the most part, his facial expressions were, pretty even keel.
He didn't look at her one time. I thought that
Yeah.
was interesting when they were showing the two shot of the candidates, because a lot of, when we're watching this, you're seeing the split screen and he's looking straight ahead, and she was looking at him a lot.
Right.
He didn't look at her one time.
And that's planned. I think in prep, right? I mean, we've both done prep with, and it's, you're going to do this, and we want you to do, X, Y, and Z. When candidates do things like we saw at Harris and Trump, it's deliberate, right? That's what they prepped for. That's what they prepped to do. So I think both camps could be fairly happy with how their candidate performed in terms of delivery and all of those things.
I think her summation was good too. Aren't you tired of this guy? I mean, I think we're exhausted with Trump fatigue. We're exhausted by this guy. Everyone is out to get him. Everyone is doing him wrong. Everyone is doing everybody wrong, and I'm your chief grievance coordinator here.
But some voters watching this will go, you know what? I hate institutions. They're doing me wrong, and this guy really pisses them off, and so I'm for him. I mean, there's a lot of those folks out there. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to have more post-debate analysis coming up right after the break.